With the Denver Broncos sitting at 4-3, maybe they should look at buying some weapons here for rookie quarterback Bo Nix. We make the case and take a look at some of the offensive positions they could look at before the NFL trade deadline here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it's your team every day, and your team happens to be the Denver Broncos. We want to thank all the everydayers and first listeners out there in Broncos Country for tuning in and making the show exactly what it is. If you're a brand new viewer or subscriber, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that button down below so you never miss out on an episode. We have one for you every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Today's episode show is brought to you by our friends over there at Hillsdale College. Go to right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. Sayre, a lot of conversation. It was nice to sit back for once on a Sunday. Say, you know what? I can just watch the games and enjoy it. Don't have to game plan about what are we going to talk about? What's the latest storyline? Like, we could just react and say, hey, Denver's coming off of a win against the Saints on Thursday Night Football. Now they get a little bit of a mini bye. They get this week to prepare for the Carolina Panthers, who are struggling, and Denver has a chance to come out at home and take care of business this week. But, you know, a lot of the conversation, especially as we get closer towards the end of October, should the Broncos maybe add some weapons on the offensive side for rookie quarterback Bo Nix? I think there's good examples for, and there's good examples against it. That's what we're going to break down here today, my friend. But I think more importantly, let's open it up by talking about it. Like, do you think that the Broncos need to buy some weapons here for Bo Nix, considering the roster how it is currently?
Well, I think always I'm looking at where the Broncos could buy to make the roster better. But I think specifically with where they're at right now, Cody, especially with Bo Nix and his development, I think getting some playmakers at the trade deadline, or getting at least somebody at the trade deadline that can help this offense in the playmaking department is essential. Honestly, I know we want to see player development, and I think we will continue to see guys like Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, these young guys getting involved, as well as the running back position. But at the same time, I think that this is a Denver Broncos roster that's one of the three, I think the three, bottom three or top three, whatever way you want to look at it, in terms of youth on the roster, like on their roster. They're one of the three youngest rosters in the league.
Yeah.
And so I think because of that, you have to be willing to live with some of the mistakes that a young roster makes, but I think it also affords the opportunity to say, hey, maybe this guy needs a little bit more time, or maybe we could supplement here, because like I just saw an article on Sunday posted by Mike Kliss, Cody, that said like the Broncos, they ain't waiting for whatever somebody says like you'll be good next year. Like, they want to be good now. Like, you're 4-3. That's a top 4 record in the AFC. Why would you not go get somebody that can help your team, even if it means just getting to the playoffs? The Broncos haven't been to the playoffs since Super Bowl 50. You're telling me that it's not worth a late round draft pick to go get a guy that can help your team right now? I'm saying buy at the NFL trade deadline, and I think the Broncos might need to get a couple of guys.
Yeah, and we'll obviously go through some of the positions here. I want to open this up by talking about one of the things after Thursday Night Football. You see the picture, Sean Payton hugging Alvin Kamara, and I think everyone's like, go get him, Sean. Go out and get Alvin. And then you have like the fake rumor that got put out there that Alvin Kamara requested a trade from the Saints. Like, things are bad in New Orleans right now. And I feel for our good friend Ross Jackson. Like, that is a roster decimated by injuries. They got off to one of the hottest starts in the first 2 weeks of the season. Injuries derailed that. And then all of a sudden now they're one of the worst teams right now in the NFL, unclear about what their vision is going to become in the NFC, specifically in that division. But I think the one thing that we maybe could talk about here, like a lot of people are saying, what would it take for Alvin Kamara? I mean, Sayre, his contract is massive. I know we talked about it on the Bleacher Report show that we did. So if Denver were to ever acquire, like, and maybe like if Alvin's available, right? Or like maybe George Payton picks up the phone and says, hey, because like Sean says, hey, George, I want a guy like Alvin. You know, we don't have a joker on the offense as is. Just call, right? And maybe they called and they figure something out. They have those conversations. I still don't know at this point, though, Sayre, if adding a running back is going to change much of this offense. I think certainly if you have a guy like Kamara, he is a legitimate playmaker. He can be a playmaker for you in this offense. But my question here is like adding a running back right now when you got a young guy in Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte is obviously doing a good job so far this season. He's turning out. He's getting a little more comfortable. Do the Broncos need to add a running back right now, or should they continue to develop and invest in guys like Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime? I mean, you even brought Blake Watson back onto the practice squad. I want to weigh the pros and cons there, and I want to ask you, I'll ask you that question, but real quick, we put a poll out here for Broncos Country on the YouTube channel. 78% of Broncos Country indicated that the tight end position is one that the team should look at, and then you have the wide receiver next at 20%. Running back at 3%. So a majority of Broncos Country is like, hey, running back, not the biggest need to add right now to this offense. How do you feel about that? And even Alvin Kamara, which I know a lot of people in Broncos Country have brought up. I don't think that would be realistic, but it's a conversation that everyone's having right now.
I think the biggest argument for making a trade for Alvin Kamara is that the Broncos offense lacks a joker, which was revealed during the broadcast from something that Kirk Herbstreit was directly told from Sean Payton, who told him, like, we don't have a joker in this offense. And I think that's what Alvin Kamara has been. Yeah, when you talk about maybe adding a running back, like, if like Dameon Pierce is available or something like that, the Broncos don't necessarily need that. You wouldn't sacrifice, snaps for Audric Estime to just trade for a running back who's a standard running back, but somebody who is as dynamic as Alvin Kamara as a receiver, a joker for Sean Payton's offense, somebody who has played that role in the past, somebody who's played in big games, and a playmaker, frankly, that the Broncos don't have. Whether or not they give Jaleel McLaughlin more touches or Audric Estime more touches, like, the Broncos don't have anybody like Alvin Kamara. And that's just the reality of things. They would have to go to the draft or free agency next year to find somebody. So I think there's merit to trading for somebody like Kamara because, yeah, he's listed as a running back, but he plays the joker in Sean Payton's offense, which we know this team for sure lacks. Now, I agree with the poll as well. Tight end at 78%. That's a large chunk of the pie there, but it's accurate. Like, the Broncos, if anything that they need right now is production at the tight end position. Look how game altering it was just to have a few catches from Lucas Kroll. But as to the contract situation, this comes up quite a bit. Obviously, like, look at what Davante Adams just did to facilitate the trade from the Raiders to the Jets. Like, that contract was prohibitive to the Jets, so he gets his base salary down to just over $800K, a cap hit of $3.2 million. You add some void years. The Broncos could very easily do that because they have all that cash from the cash-rich owners. Alvin Kamara's contract next year, over $29 million against the cap. I understand that's an intimidating figure, but at the same time, that cap hit doesn't fully come over. And even if the base salary is over $20 million, Cody, I think Alvin would come to the Broncos with the understanding of, like, we're going to redo your deal to make sure it works next year. But the Broncos have the flexibility to say, this contract is non-guaranteed next year, so you could just easily cut him next year if it doesn't work out. I'm all for the rental, and I think it makes a lot of sense from that joker perspective.
Well, we'll see, especially if the Saints continue to deal with injuries and continue to lose. There could be some changes there with their head coaching job, and they could even become sellers at the NFL trade deadline. A lot of conversation around the NFL here, but Broncos Country, always want to get your thoughts as well. Your thoughts on if there's any running backs out there, and even Alvin Kamara, if Denver should inquire about them at the NFL trade deadline to add a new weapon here for Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix. It could certainly help open things up offensively a little bit more. The question is, can the offensive line, like my own question, can they be more consistent in terms of their blocking? It's been hit or miss, a good portion of this season, but we saw obviously a really good game from them in Thursday Night Football against the Saints. But we'll also take a look at if the Broncos maybe look at tight ends, because Broncos Country also agrees 78% of the fan base believes that they should look at adding a tight end at the NFL trade deadline. Who are some options and what would make sense? We take a look at that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us, but what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. I've benefited from utilizing therapy in the past, whether you're dealing with stress, anxiety, depression, or even if you're working in a high-performance type of industry, you have a lot of different stresses that are associated with that. Therapy can help you understand yourself a little bit more. Life doesn't come with a playbook or a manual that tells you, hey, here's what you can do when you deal with this. Sometimes life has a lot of unexpected things that come up, and the best way to prepare for that is to know yourself a little bit further. Therapy can be a great point for that. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and best of all, suited to your schedule, where you can do it from the comfort of your own home. You can do it while you're sitting in your own bed. You can do it in your kitchen, whatever it may be. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you don't vibe with your therapist, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Education is a great way to do that, whether that's history, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. If you study these things in school, then maybe not. But even if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher, because over the years, sometimes we lose things in terms of in our head that we don't use on a consistent basis. And our sponsor, Hillsdale College, they're offering more than 40 free, that's right, free FREE online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, Atlanta Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and a whole lot more inside of Hillsdale College. And it is entirely free, folks. So once again, all of Hillsdale's courses, they're self-paced so that you can start whenever. You can tune in wherever you're at. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or you can just enjoy the lectures. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon.
Could we see the Denver Broncos go after a tight end at or before the 2024 NFL trade deadline? I guess we're fixing to find out, as the great coach Gary Kubiak used to say, but Broncos Country certainly has made it known that they would like to see the team acquire a tight end that can maybe help out in the passing game. And I know some are saying, hey, we need some help in the running game as well, but a tight end nonetheless. Cody and I are going to talk about some options for the Denver Broncos as we approach. Gosh, we're already towards the end of the month of October, Broncos Country. Kind of crazy, but we're going to be talking, as the weeks progress here, a little bit more playoffs as well. So, Broncos Country, if you haven't already done so, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or on YouTube, or both if you haven't done so already. And you know that your boys, Cody and Sayre, will be here for you every single day. And shout out to all the everyday listeners of the show. Cody, let's talk about this. The tight end position, obviously the fans have spoken. The listeners have spoken. They want to see this team acquire a tight end. It's been a pretty down year across the NFL at, I guess, a lot of teams at the tight end position, hasn't it been? I mean, I know I see a lot of the fantasy football people talking about how, man, this is a rough year for tight ends. We've seen people clamoring for Noah Fant to come back to Denver. I know he's a good player.
I enjoyed watching him over the weekend for Seattle. And it wasn't like anything designed. It's like little dump offs, yards after the catch stuff. I mean, he was fun to watch. But even like guys like Travis Kelce this year are down.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy to see. So I think the Broncos are in the same boat as a number of teams, but obviously with what we've seen so far, unless we've seen the new floor for Lucas Kroll, which is what we saw against the Saints, I think obviously the Broncos do need to figure something out here. If it's not acquiring a tight end, bringing up Donald Parham Jr., realistically, what are we looking at here with a couple of weeks left to the trade deadline? Who do you see as potential options for the Broncos?
Well, I mean, I don't know who are legit options for the Broncos, because I don't know if like the top names that people have thrown out, if these guys are even available for the teams, right? I think if you look at our comments on YouTube, a lot of people are saying when we talk about the episodes where we're highlighting the offense, a lot of people are saying, well, hey, maybe the Broncos should call up the Cleveland Browns and inquire about David Njoku. They look like they're selling. And obviously now they're going to be in a world of hurt. Well, their quarterback is done for the year. Their backup quarterback got banged up. The only guy healthy right now is Jameis Winston. But is David Njoku going to be a guy there? Because Denver plays the Browns this year, I'm not sure if they were going to trade, if they'd trade him to someone that they're going to play. But on top of that, why trade to an AFC rival at that point? Another name is the Atlanta Falcons. We see a lot about Kyle Pitts. I don't know if they're going to trade Kyle Pitts. I don't even know if they would entertain that, but that's just something like, well, his targets are down. He's not as featured in the offense as he was. I know they're coming off of a really rough loss this past week to the Seattle Seahawks. And ironically enough, where we got to see Noah Fant shine a little bit in action in that game. To be honest with you right now, Sayre, I'm trying to ask myself the question here. Does adding a guy like David Njoku or even a guy like Kyle Pitts right now change anything for the Broncos offense to make it significantly better? Like on paper, I think it gets better, but from a production standpoint, do we see it, right? Because we always see with these teams and these players that go to these new teams, there's always an adjustment period of trying to learn the system, trying to get acclimated to that role there. It's hard. It's hard to make things pop. And as you mentioned, with the tight end position, production being kind of down across the entire league compared to what we are normally seeing, I find it a little interesting. Like it's a gamble type of move. Is it something you would make right now? Like I've liked a little bit of the steady path that we're starting to see with Lucas Kroll. I thought he had a nice game on Thursday Night Football. You want to see him continue to stack there. But I agree with you. Like you're getting blocking contributions from Adam Troutman, Nate Adkins. Like Denver's going 12 and 13 personnel. Those are the top two guys in there in that situation because they believe it's foundational for their run offense, which has been up and down, right? So philosophically, does adding a tight end make sense right now for the Broncos, considering what we're seeing, and especially with a guy like Darnell Parham Jr., who you do have on the practice squad, who's been learning the system for quite some time? Greg Dulcich's struggles have been evident, and they've been documented here. If any change happens, I imagine it's Denver maybe moving on from him and maybe elevating a guy like Donald Parham to the active roster. But at this point, I don't see them trading for one. Should they? Maybe. If they believe it's going to help them, yes. But will they? I don't think they do.
Yeah, it's a really tough balance there because of something that you mentioned that's very true. Like, does it improve your team on paper? Absolutely, because a lot of folks out there are used to, well, you just add a guy to the roster in Madden and all of a sudden you have an 84 overall tight end or something like that. And obviously that's just immediately an upgrade for your team. But the NFL is different, like we saw Amari Cooper get a touchdown in his first game for the Bills. And, we'll see how Devontae Adams does as we're recording this, kind of awaiting to see how he does with the Jets. So
his first pass was dropped.
There we go. So, hey, you never know. The pressure is on when you acquire a guy in a trade too, right? Because remember in 2015, the Broncos trade for Vernon Davis, and he struggled with drops the remainder of that year, to say the least. And then the dude goes to Washington and plays at borderline a Pro Bowl level. It's like, wait a second. That's the guy that we traded for. Yeah, you had Peyton Manning throwing you the ball. I mean, I know it was kind of the ghost of Peyton, but at the same time. So the Broncos, they do need to be opportunistic if possible, in my opinion, Cody. Like if, let's say the Jaguars are having a little bit of a fire sale, Evan Ingram becomes available and for like a 5th or 6th round pick or a pick swap on day 3, something like that would make a lot of sense for this team to try and say like, hey, it was worth the risk at the end of the day. Like it was worth a shot. But if you're saying like, hey, trade a 3rd round pick for David Njoku, I don't know if I would go that far. I guess I haven't really necessarily done enough research on his overall game. And we all know what he's capable of as a pass catcher, but his fit for the offense and things like that. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think you're right. I think, man, it's really weighing the getting better on paper versus actually becoming a better football team and being opportunistic in terms of like the John Franklin Myers trade, where you give up a future way down in the future 6th round pick for a guy who's going to start for you and play an impact role. Like that's the kind of, I know those trades don't come around all the time.
No,
but
that's
that's
a steal.
The type of deal. That's the type of steal you're looking for if you're George Big Money Payton right now.
That might have been the steal of the offseason, if we're going to be honest. Like looking at how it started so far, that has to be one of the conversations for steal of the offseason. Unbelievable. And look, obviously the Jets have now worked out their deals with Hassan Reddick and whatnot. But I think that the Broncos are getting the better end of the stick here, especially with the impact JFM has had not only against the run, but getting after the quarterback from a guy who's playing defensive end, which Denver hasn't had that in quite some time. But yeah, I mean, Broncos Country, opening things up to you here once again. We want to know, like, the tight end position. Is it worth it right now? Is it worth the risk or the gamble, as Sayre had mentioned, for Denver to maybe offset capital to acquire a tight end, knowing that right now, based on what we've seen from this offense, there's no guarantee that it's going to elevate it as it currently stands? So risk reward, let us know what you're thinking if you're obviously watching or listening to Locked On Broncos wherever you get your podcast. But also taking a look at the widespread notion about Denver adding some more playmakers. We're going to weigh the pros and cons about looking at the wide receiver market. Denver's got Courtland Sutton there, but could there be a team in the NFC who had previous interest in Courtland? Could they maybe pop back up after a major injury to their star wide receiver happened over Sunday? We'll debate that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and they want you to get involved here this NFL season where you have a chance to come up with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get in the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats as they happen. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets, or you just get involved in the NFL action weekly. One thing I always do, I like to put together a little bit of a parlay where I pick all the money lines for the morning games. I also do that for the afternoon games. Or if you even want to do a same game parlay for just one game, you can do just that inside of the FanDuel Sportsbook app. And as week 8 approaches here of the NFL season, the Broncos, they open up against the Carolina Panthers as 7.5-point home favorites, their biggest advantage so far that they've had this season. And when you go into the FanDuel app today as a brand new customer, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Once again, place your first $5 bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, all on FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Injuries change the landscape of every NFL team, especially right before the NFL trade deadline. And if the Denver Broncos are looking to add playmakers, they could part ways with one if there's another team that's willing to give them draft capital that maybe gives them a chance to get more ammunition for the future. We'll break that all down here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Once again, Broncos Country, thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to us or to watch us break down all things Denver Broncos related, whether it's YouTube or your favorite podcasting provider. We appreciate you so much. It would mean the world to us if you subscribe to follow the show. We're close to 15K on YouTube. In Broncos Country, that's not possible without you. We appreciate you so much here. Sayre, let's open things up. Now, obviously, we did the poll there with Broncos Country. 20% out of all the votes that we got, obviously, we talked about 78% said that Denver needs to trade for a tight end. 20% said wide receiver. I'm looking at it right now, Sayre, and looking at the wide receiver market, potentially for trade candidates. I don't know if there's anyone out there right now, like the guy that you and I had talked about, Amari Cooper. He's in Buffalo, right? The Devontae Adams was never going to happen to an AFC West division rival, and obviously he's going to go play with his best friend over there in New York. I couldn't help but on Sunday watch the Detroit Lions against Minnesota Vikings, game of the week. Very entertaining there. And I see it on a weekly basis now, right? He's not their volume guy, but I see Tim Patrick's name being brought up as, wow, this guy has been such an impact role player for us since the onset here, right? And you're going to have people that are just box score watchers say, well, he only has this amount of catches, this many yards. It's not about that. It's what is he doing in the blocking game? What is he doing in the receiving game in big moments? He's coming up clutch. Anybody in Detroit will tell you that right now. And look, I think you and I have kind of banged this drum a little bit. And we're not saying like, oh, why did the Broncos do it? But it's like, I look at Denver's offense right now, Sayre, and I feel like, man, I feel like this receiver on this offense would have benefited from having a guy like Tim Patrick. Granted, he missed all the games the last couple of years with injuries. He's healthy right now, but he's playing at a high level in Detroit, and he's not the main guy. And he's that solid, consistent role player. You telling me that Denver couldn't benefit from a guy like that right now is a little bit crazy to me. I want to get your thoughts on that. Like, how do you feel about Denver's wide receiver room? Because I feel like we can look at where Courtland's at. We can look at the guys that they have, the youth there. I mean, there's arguments for and against maybe looking at adding a wide receiver.
Yeah, there really are. And I think that when you look at this wide receiver room, it's like the youth across the roster where you're kind of saying, okay, we're going to kind of live with taking some of these lumps here with guys like obviously Marvin Mims, who has had a number of big time mistakes or, drops early this season already. And we haven't seen his involvement in the offense that we wanted to see. Troy Franklin, his role has been coming along slowly but surely, which is exciting to see, but also frustrating at times, obviously, when you want the immediate results. Devon Vele has a nice opener, then he gets hurt with the ribs injury. And during that time in the interim, that's when you really said, like, man, a guy like Tim Patrick right now to move the chains, to just help extend drives here and there. That would be so nice because for whatever reason, Courtland Sutton hasn't been able to really be that. I mean, even with Russell Wilson, we know that Courtland had 10 touchdowns, had some huge catches, some unbelievable catches. And I don't want to take anything away from that because those were insane and fun to watch. But at the same time, you and I talked on this show almost every week last year about how the Broncos just didn't feel like they had a bread and butter in the passing game? Where are the quick slants to a go-to receiver? Where are those times when you can just throw the ball to a guy and he's going to give you a clutch catch? Where's that guy that gets open on third downs? Like, I know you can't necessarily compare it to the best receivers around the league, but it feels like a lot of teams have those guys that you can rely on this guy creating separation or getting open on clutch downs and moving the chains for you to extend drives and to be back breaking like first down catches for your team. And Courtland has, I mean, for whatever reason, whether it's the quarterback not throwing him the ball, whether it's him not getting open consistently, whether it's the offense not being schemed to go to him, whatever the case may be, he hasn't been that guy for the Broncos. And that has me very curious about, well, why is that? So that's kind of where I'm at right now with the wide receiver position.
When he didn't have a target in this last game against New Orleans Saints, he had one, but there was a defensive holding. Okay, automatic first down. That was it, but it doesn't show up as a target when you look at the score, the stat box, and everything like that. But then it's like the things that you mentioned, like the yards after the catch. Okay, hey, we're seeing Troy Franklin. We're seeing Devon Bailey catching some of those slants and those designs. I did a film review over at milehighsports.com for their YouTube and the website. Make sure you go check it out. But it's like, we've talked so much about Bo's footwork, which will be a subject of our mailbag episode that we're going to do on tomorrow's episode of Lockdown Broncos for all the everydayers out there. But it's like when Bo is setting his feet, like he's firing quick shots on slants to Devon Bailey. And look, you're getting 12 yards, you're getting 8 yards. Like it's things that we haven't seen in this offense in quite some time. And I don't know, maybe it's like because those things are opening up for those young guys. But Courtland is seeing a lot of attention because he is, like, when you look at Denver's roster, he is their wide receiver one, right? And so teams are game planning to play. Look, against, like, you have a guy like Marshawn Lattimore, you have a safety like Tyrann Mathieu. You're going to jam, you're going to play inside, outside leverage, and you're going to have help over the top all the time if you are on that situation. Because you're like, hey, we're going to take away Courtland. He's their big play receiver. You're going to live with these young guys maybe making plays and trying to beat you. And look, these guys are stepping up. I thought Troy Franklin, Devon Bailey did a really good job. Would have liked to see a better game from Marvin Mims in the receiving department there, but now you got the injury to Josh Reynolds, who's on IR for quite some time, for at least another 3 or 4 weeks. So my question here is there anybody that can make a difference? Is this where, I'm not saying that he's going to come in and break things out. Like, we did a practice squad episode on A.T. Perry. It did 33,000 views on YouTube, right? But okay, you got a 6'5" guy who's got very deceptive speed. Why not see a little bit about what he can do for you? Like, he's a developmental player. Not saying he's going to come in and be a star, but maybe you add another wrinkle to the mix. I think the biggest wild card here, Sayre, I don't see Denver trading for a wide receiver. But as we mentioned at the start of this segment, injuries impact the landscape of various teams' outlooks across the NFL right before the NFL trade deadline. The San Francisco 49ers, a team who had interest in Courtland Sutton in this offseason, had him as part of a package deal, a potential 3-team trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The question that you have here is, okay, you lose Brandon Aiyuk to a torn ACL for the entire year. You need a guy there. Does this suddenly pique the interest of the San Francisco 49ers maybe picking up the phone and calling Denver saying, hey, look, we need help. We'll give you this. And obviously with the history that these two teams had with trading and dealing with each other, it makes sense, especially if you're invested now in these young guys developing a little bit further.
Yeah, especially because the Broncos could reasonably, I mean, on paper, you could put all the pieces together, right? You could bring A.T. Perry up, have him play maybe that X receiver role. You move Devon Bailey around. Sean Payton likes him in the slot, likes him outside. Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin could continue to get snaps. Then obviously you have Josh Reynolds eventually coming back to be that veteran in the room. So it's not that it would be addition by subtraction necessarily, because Courtland Sutton is obviously still a very good, I mean, we saw the one-handed catch. I mean, he can still do things for you. But if you're all about the youth movement, I mean, maybe I don't see that. I don't see that the Broncos would say no to I mean, they've allegedly said no to some pretty darn good offers from what people have assumed would be a good return for Courtland Sutton. Like, the Broncos have allegedly turned down like 3rd-round pick offers for this guy. So if something comes in at or around that value, I mean, would they say no this time around, given now that we've seen proof of concept on the field from guys like Franklin, from Vele, and hopefully soon from A.T. Perry? I think his situation, Perry in specific, against the Carolina Panthers bears some monitoring, Cody, because I know he hasn't been around that long, but maybe if he starts getting shuffled up to the active roster, we might need to be on Courtland Sutton trade watch.
Maybe something to keep an eye on here. And look, Broncos country, we're not advocating for Denver to trade Courtland away. We're just looking at, okay, hey, what's going on around the NFL? What is Denver looking to do? They're getting a larger look. You've heard Sean Payton say, we want to look at our young guys. We want to get a look there. And that we interpreted that as the running back position with Audric Estime, and felt like there was a little bit of a call out. And I thought Javonte Williams responded well. Jaleel McLaughlin did, and Audric Estime had the fumble on Thursday night. But I would say that the wide receiver position right now could maybe see a little bit of a youth movement going forward, because Denver, I mean, look, Devon Vela, I think, is a surprise to a lot of people in terms of what he looked like in training camp and the preseason. He could be a surprise, come out of nowhere, emerging guy. Troy Franklin, they believe, can be a playmaker for them on the offensive side of the ball. Am I saying that Troy's going to be a superstar in the NFL? No, I mean, there's a lot of things he's going to have to accomplish before he ever gets to that. And then you have a solid role player in Josh Reynolds. I do think regardless, though, right, Denver is going to be focused on adding a playmaker. Is it going to be at the trade deadline? I don't think so. But I think next year in free agency, I think in the NFL draft, playmaker probably becomes the top option for them as Bo Nix prepares for his second season around the NFL. Broncos country, always eager for your thoughts here. Make sure you let us know what you thought of today's episode of Locked On Broncos. If you're listening to wherever you get your podcast, or if you're watching us here on YouTube, you liked it, make sure you subscribe or follow if you haven't done so already, so you never miss out. Thanks for making us your first listen. For your second listen of the day, go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, 2 episodes per day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Plus, you get our AFC and NFC squad shows on the Locked On NFL channel and your favorite teams channels as well on Wednesdays. A lot of fun discussion around the NFC and the AFC. We appreciate you so much. Tomorrow's episode, a mailbag. We're going to answer 3 of the biggest questions sent in from Broncos country. Did yours make the cut? Tune in to find out. We'll see you then.